Okay, guys, thank you for having me this morning. I'm basically going to talk about AI revolution, which is a topic quite hot nowadays. Basically, the title of my talk is "The AI Revolution is There. Are you ready?" That's basically what I'm going to talk about this morning. And as an outline, I'll basically try my best to define the AI, big data, data science, and talk a little bit about the hype that is around it nowadays. And I will share with you some of the success stories and how some companies are using it. And if time allows, we'll define what machine learning is, what deep learning is, and the big question that I think we should ask ourselves this morning, with the hopes that it could be answered in the future, is where is Africa on the map of AI? I think that's the reason why we are gathered this morning. And I'm also going to share some subjective view about where the world is heading, and if we are even prepared for that. And hopefully by the end of this talk, everyone will be able to answer the question, should we join the AI revolution? So first of all, before going ahead, this talk is really for a general audience, which means I will not go technical. I will try my best to really stay superficial for everyone to understand. No technical terms. So my name is Rockefeller. I am a data scientist consultant. I also train people in data science, and I'm doing my PhD at Stellenbosch University, as it's already mentioned. And this is my email address for further communications. So I will start with this question: should we join AI revolution? And such a questions, I think the modern society where we are living in at the moment actually shapes us to answer this question by a yes or a no. And me, I call this binary thinking. And I wanted to step away from binary thinking and begin to ask questions like why? Why shall we join this AI revolution? And yet, when you begin to this type of exercise, basically you start asking yourself, what is AI? Where does that come from? Why is it even a revolution? And I believe if you do that, you might have a chance to arrive to an informed conclusion and therefore give a shot to a yes or a no. I'm going to take the second approach, and hopefully you guys everyone will answer for his or herself at the end of the talk whether it's important for him or her to join the AI revolution. So when you begin to do some kind of genealogy, you have to go back in the past. I'll not go too much back in the past, just on recent times, where in 2017, for instance, Vladimir Putin said that the nation that will lead in AI will rule the world. And some big names in AI, like Jan LeCun, for instance, was talking about the fact that AI is an extension of intelligence. And well-known professors like Fei, she understood AI as the fourth industrial revolution, where people need to prepare because it's going to impact every aspect of our lives. And some other people like Amit Ray, they want to sound a little bit more emotional and compassionate. They talk about an era of AI being an era of non-violence and love. And there's a second school of thoughts, people that are kind of alarming about AI. They thought, or they think, like Stephen Hawking, for instance, the late Stephen Hawking, he thought that because we are so limited in our biological evolutions, the development of AI could spell the end of the human race. And because AI is also could be the biggest event in human history because it's actually being spread out across so many fields, not to mention every single field. And he think that this might be the last biggest event of the human history. And Elon Musk, who recently acquired Twitter, said that if AI wants to destroy humanity, and it could do it without any hard feelings. And I think it talk about general AI in this case. And also Sam Altman said that AI will more likely lead to the end of the world. But in the meantime, there will be great companies. And I think there are so many great companies nowadays. Maybe we are currently living we're currently heading towards the end of the world, but we will see. I can also take a chance to extend what they said in actually trying to understand some of the present topic nowadays still using AI, from the economic war that happens between US and China, all the way up to why Facebook became Meta, all the way to, for instance, the post-human era that people are talking about nowadays, which will see the birth of humanoid and the triumph of transhumanism. And also some of the things that are currently also pressing, the fact that large language model, if not well monitored enough, could actually spread out hatred instead of love or compassion or things like that. So each and every topic, which is quite modern, could be answered or could be tackled by the means of AI. You can see that those two letters, A and I, which stands for artificial intelligence, It's actually governing the world we are actually heading to. Let's try and do some definition, understand what AI even means. And according to Investopedia, they said that AI is simply the simulation of human intelligence by machines that are programmed to think like humans and mimic their actions by processing huge amounts of data and extract patterns from them. Tricky definition, I think. But let's try and break this down. To understand this definition, I think there are three main words that we need to pay attention to: huge, data, and pattern. Because I genuinely believe those are the three concepts that actually makes AI so famous, so popular, so modern, so vivid nowadays. And when you begin to do such things, you have to first of all understand the term data. And I will take you back to one of the famous quotes on history that comes from the good book, which say that in the beginning was the data. And but what is the data actually? Well, there are so many definitions of what the word data might mean. And I will actually throw you guys across a couple of fields in order to understand that. In computing, for instance, when you have a piece of information that can be translated in a form that is efficient for processing, you can call it data. Think of, for instance, as a signal that you get from a sensor, or a certain file or folder that you enter in your computer, or simply a number that you enter in a spreadsheet. This can be considered or pictured as data. In statistics, for instance, we carry out observation on population, and the result we got from that could be called data. Like, for instance, if you begin to count the number of attendees in this workshop, this can be a piece of data. If you count the amount of COVID-19 cases recorded in some cities in Cameroon, this can be a piece of data. Second definition, different definition. In social sciences, for instance, people debate most of the time. And basically, when they begin to quote Greek authors, or maybe to take some item from the penal code or verse from the Bible, for instance, to actually back up their argument, those can be considered as a piece of data. And in marketing, where any piece of information that could turn a prospect into a client can be also called a data. Like, for instance, the number of ads that is displayed on our Facebook timeline in a day. This is a piece of data for people in digital marketing. We can see there are so many definitions. I can actually also carry on with so many fields and bring some other definition of the word data. But what we noticed from those past definition is anytime there is something that is collected, measured, observed, recorded, and visualized. And if one wants to actually put together a unified definition of data, you could simply say it is anything that can be observed, collected, recorded, analyzed, and visualized. Now think of your field of expertise. Do you have anything in your field of expertise that can satisfy those five criteria? If the answer is yes, therefore, you can generate data from your field. And if data can be generated from your field, then AI could be applied to it. Now, let's be a little bit more subtle than that, or bring some kind of nuance in this thing. Every morning when we wake up, some of us, we like to write down the list of the things we want to do in a day, like waking up in the morning, cleaning the house, playing music, and things like that. But the moment, whatever you wrote on your piece of paper remain on that piece of paper, it's just data, because it's actually has no to little use, and it's not marketable, and it's very little profitable unless it's just to you. It's quite subjective. But the moment you begin to use software systems, computer, tablets, to record such information, therefore, the data that you have takes another step forward. It becomes information, which can be useful, which is very useful, which can be marketable and profitable, not by you, unfortunately. And we call it objective now. But I know some of us don't like to write down things they want to do in a day. They prefer to communicate with people, to share on social media, the places they go to, the videos they watch, the items they purchase, the shops they visit, the picture they post. And when you do it using a platform, a smartphone connected to the internet, you're generating information. And when you begin to share those things with your family, for instance, or when you do such thing, you're actually designing a digital footprint of yours in the internet. And when you begin to share this information with your family, for instance, through connections, through interaction on WhatsApp or Facebook or whatever, therefore you're actually grounding the database of some kind, I would say. And the moment you begin to do this in community with your network of friends or with your family, Therefore, that's how you quickly reach out to what we call now big data, because data keeps on getting massive and massive and massive. So what is big data? Well, simply put, big data, according to Investopedia again, they said big data simply is the kind of data that is so large, fast, complex, that is even difficult or impossible to process using traditional methods. Still a tricky definition, but I will break that down for you. Big data is simply data that is big, right? But how big? Or what does the word big mean? Well, big can, because the big data or the data that is big is actually characterized by what we call the 5 V's. And the 5 V's stands for velocity, volume, variety, veracity, and value. Velocity because the speed at which data is generated is very fast, and the volume is increasing at an incredible shape. The variety, we have different sorts of information. Now we have data generated from sensors, from computer, from software systems, and so on, from satellite even. And the veracity, which account for the quality and integrity, and also the credibility of the information that you have, together with the value. But I think the most important concept here, which is also the most careful one, is the veracity, because we are actually living in an era where we can't always trust the information we see on social media, on the internet. For instance, all of us, when you want to quickly Google about something, the first reflex we have is to go to Wikipedia. What if I tell you that Wikipedia on their website, they said that they are not a reliable source? You can check that for yourself. Maybe that will ring the bell. But let's go back to our big data thing. The top companies, as we speak, that are currently possessing all the, that are currently guiding the world in terms of data and applications, are the giants that we see on the screen. They are either USA based or China based. On the US side, we have Alphabet, which is the parent company of Google. We have Apple, Meta, Facebook, Amazon, and Microsoft. And the China-based companies, we have Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, and Xiaomi. For instance, think of Google, for instance. We recorded around 4 million of Google searches made every single minute. 4 hours of videos uploaded on YouTube every single minute. That's big data being generated. On Twitter, for instance, we have an average of 350,000 tweets every minute. Not even to mention the 3 million posts that people upload every single minute on Facebook. That's big data. In Africa, for instance, we have a couple of companies, mostly on the telecommunication side or in the retailer side, like Jumia, Takealot, MTN, and Orange, that are also kind of collecting some kind of big data, I would say. But still, let's try and understand a little bit more in detail what the word AI may mean. Now you begin to see that at the heart of AI, there's a field that is called data science, which lies at the core of AI. And what is data science? Well, simply put, data science is simply the study of the data. But if you want to be more subtle than that, data science actually lies at this intersection using this Venn diagram between mathematics and statistics, computer science, and business domain knowledge. That's why mathematician, for instance, I used to say that data science is actually the field that's gonna allow us to get our revenge in the world. I might develop on that a bit later. And at the heart of data science, there's a field called machine learning. You can see at the heart of AI, we have data science. At the heart of data science, we have something we call machine learning. But machine learning itself is divided into 3 subfields. There's a classical machine learning, there's deep learning, and there's reinforcement learning. But the subfield that is currently the most prominent one is called deep learning. And deep learning is actually subfield of machine learning that is specialized on working what we call neural network. I don't want to go too much in detail with that, but neural network is simply a collection of neurons put together in the form of a layer and concatenated and so on, that are able actually to model some input-output relationship between the data. And the techniques that are the backbones of neural network basically exist since 1950s. But it has been made possible because of the computational power. That's why deep learning is so famous nowadays. The availability of the data and also the computational power. And when you think about it, deep learning in a nutshell is simply about resolving this equation that you see on the screen. It's actually about finding X, finding Y, given X. And the different subfields we have in deep learning, we have things like deep neural network, we have things like convolutional neural network. that account for things like image classification and so on. I don't want to go too much into detail with that. And now, to also give you another layer of definition of machine learning to make it a bit simple, think about traditional programming, for instance, that we all learn at high school. How does traditional programming works? Well, what you do in traditional programming, you have some inputs and you actually write down a set of rules. And you have your input, you give it to your model or to your little software, which has internally crafted set of rules, and you get some outputs. A very simple example of that is when, for instance, let's say you want to turn on your TV, or you want to switch from one channel to the other. What do? You take the remote control, you point it on the TV directions, and you send an input signal by pressing the key or the tab the channel that you want to access to. And when you press, for instance, number 2, you actually send an input signal to the software, which is embedded in the TV, and receive an output, which is the channel that you actually wanted to watch. Machine learning actually flip those axes around. Like, instead of designing the rules, which you're going to wait for an input to produce an output, you actually put together input and output that you got from historical data, and the algorithms designed using mathematics and so on is able to learn the rules behind the system you're currently dealing with. That's the parallelism between traditional programming and machine learning. Now, think of, for instance, I'm giving a little exercise. Can you write a program that can recognize cats in the image? If you want to use traditional programming to do such job, what you want to do is basically going to craft a program, for instance, taking into account the distance between the eyes and distance between the musky, taking into account the shape of the ears and so on, and basically use those different type of information in order to say that, hey, given those criteria, we have a cat. And such system will work very well. I'm hearing some background noise from you. Can you mute everyone? Can you mute everyone, please?
Is it possible?
Yeah, it's okay now.
Sorry for the interruption. Please, you can continue.
I was saying that if you crafted enough rules that can take into account the different parameters I just cited, therefore a program like that can basically 100% of the time guess that from this type of images we have a cat. But what if you begin to give cats that take different position, like a cat upside down, a cat with a cloth, a cat with a glasses, for instance? Therefore, they said there's a chance that your program might start failing unless you add another layer of rules and another layer and so on. And you're actually slowly moving to what we call an expert system. But instead of taking that approach, machine learning actually flipped the axis. It learns a little bit like the children used to learn, like we all did when we were kids. We basically, before we even reached kindergarten, all of us were able to tell a difference between a cat and a dog, or a cat and a truck, for instance. How did we do that? Because we learned through observations. We learn through repetition. Our parents tell us, hey, 10,000 a time, this is a truck, this is a cat. So that we can develop a memory without necessarily knowing the science behind the object we're actually watching. That's a little bit how machine learning algorithms also learn. Think, for instance, another instance, how does bank traditionally used to issue loans to customers? Well, when you go to a bank, you basically give your couple of information, which is your inputs, right? Like things like your transaction history, your current job status, your monthly income. And based on the rules that are designed internally, they are able to tell whether you will be accepted or rejected, or they will give you a loan or not. If such problem is entrusted to machine learning to do, well, it's going to flip the axis around. One more time, it takes historical data of people that have been accepted and rejected based on the information and give it to the algorithms to train for a certain amount of time, and it will be able to learn the rules or the relationship between the customer's data and the outcome of the application. I hope you begin to see how it comes about. Thanks to that actual principle, nowadays companies like Amazon, for instance, are able to recommend product to their customers to design targeted advertising for their customers. Some universities are actually grading their essays using AI softwares. Some of the companies are designing systems of offers that can retain employees when they want to leave, thanks to AI as well. All of that using that very same principle. Now, there was an era where we used to have data scarcity, but nowadays we have what we call data deluge, because you basically have information in the weather, in the weather side, in physics, in cosmology, in genomics, in social media, in bioinformatics, in CCTV and military, in finance and banking, and all of those different fields. Companies and investors millions of dollars in order to actually reach the highest potential, combining AI and the data that they have. What are we waiting for? Well, because we begin to see that AI, thanks to the sophisticated algorithms, the computing power, is now reshaping the way industry works. It's disrupting existing business models. You know, the way traditional companies used to work will not work anymore in the years to come, even starting from today. And also thanks to the AI and the data availability, companies like Uber, Google, Facebook have emerged. And at the moment, if a company really wants to sustain its business, they have to take it in account on Facebook, for instance, or Instagram or Twitter or whatever, because those companies, which are called platform companies, actually they possess the best technology out there available in order to turn data into information or to find pattern within the data in order to increase the values in those companies. Like LinkedIn, for instance, the moment we provide our data to LinkedIn, for instance, what do? They recommend us, they actually link us to the job that can suit our profiles. Facebook, for instance, when we give them our data, they're able now to build image recognition system that can connect us more and more and create some sub networks of interest. You do the same with text data, videos, images, and the way we interact with ourselves to create those sub networks of interest. I'm sending you guys to try and check what is inside the world of interest. We'll talk about it a little bit later. And it feels like in healthcare, for instance, nowadays AI is able to assist pathologists in making more accurate diagnosis, perform some assisted medical surgery, and things like that. And we even have companies like Google, for instance, that is currently busy solving the death through a company called Calico, which is a startup put together by Google. In fields like fraud detection, for instance, we are currently detecting suspicious transactions with the use of AI, detecting false insurance claim with the use of AI. And a part of AI to me, which is a little bit more impressive, is the creative part of it. Nowadays, AI systems are able to create innovative music. They're able to design music that had never been designed before. They're able to continue the legacy of great artists like Manu Dibango or Da Vinci, for instance, by completing the discography. It's like you take all the discography of one artist, for instance, give it to AI algorithms, and it can learn how the style that the person used to design his music in order to produce music that the person has never produced before. In poetry, for instance, people are using AI to complete missing pieces of movies or painting or literature, for instance. In cosmetics, in L'Oreal, for instance, is currently working on creating new fragrance with the use of AI. Now, I'm pretty sure at this point in time, you're basically asking yourself, are we going to lose our jobs to AI? Well, the answer is yes, in some cases. 40% of the world's current jobs are predicted to be lost due to automation. But new jobs will also emerge. We'll see things like machine learning engineering becoming more and more popular. Things like metaverse marketing agent become popular. AI regulator, for instance, will also emerge. But it's good to talk about those things. But where is Africa on the map of AI? At this point in time, AI technologies are forecast to add $15 trillion to the global economy by 2030. But as we speak, there are no African countries in the top 50 in the world that are investing in AI, according to the Government Readiness Index in 2021. But out of the top 100, only 12 African countries are actually doing their best. And the top 5 are in a disorder: Kenya, Tunisia, Mauritius, South Africa, and Ghana. Though the potential is very huge in domains like agriculture, healthcare, language, modeling, fintech, logistics, art, entertainment, etc. But I actually managed to get a little map that can tell us where and where some of the African countries are doing their best in the field of AI. We can see, like, if you look at this map, for instance, 80% of the continent has not yet adopted AI. We are talking about something that will revolutionize our life, the way we live, the way we work, the way we do things. Only 20% of this map is filled. And I don't really want to count South Africa because it's a different setting. But it's time for the continent to actually wake up. But in educational side, some institutions are actually trying to put together some blended training in AI, data science, climate science, and fundamental mathematics. Institutions like AIMS, for instance, through their master's degree that they offer on the fully funded scholarship basis, things like African Master of Mathematics for Machine Intelligence in Rwanda, Ghana, and Senegal, that are also doing the same. Black in AI, for instance, they offer a sponsorship for people to attend international conferences in AI. Institutions like Deep Learning in Daba, Simpa School, KmerAi AI are organizing on a regular basis conference initiative where people can share the advances on AI in the continent. But that's not enough, because when you look at the continent, for instance, our primary resources is the human resources. I don't know whether you know about it. Africa is set to be home of a quarter of the world population by 2050. And if you think about the penetration rate of internet in Africa, for instance, and think about Africa having a quarter of the world population by 2015, are we going to remain just end user of AI technology? I think it's a time for the continent to wake up and do something about it. Because in the field of agriculture, for instance, you have a country like DRC, for instance, where 70% of the land is arable. That gives a huge potential, massive, to develop AI in order to understand better agriculture. In language modeling, for instance, a country like Cameroon has more than 200 local languages. We need to build things like, we need to invest in NLP, for instance, in order to develop our language, in order to design systems that can understand our local language. We're not doing that. Companies like Google, for instance, they are investing massive amounts of money in Nigeria, for instance, or recently in Kenya and in Ghana, in order to build AI models that can understand Yoruba, for instance, Swahili, and the likes. But what are we waiting for to build such a thing in Lingala and Mejumba, for instance, which is one of the local languages in Cameroon? In a sector in the mining sector, for instance, where we also have a huge potential, you can use AI, for instance, to actually better understand our natural resources, to detect some structures and so on. In the educational sector, where I think massive amounts of time and money and need to be invested in order to be prepared for that revolution. Because AI is a revolution. Think about the first industrial revolution that used water and steam engines to mechanize production. The second one used electric power to create mass production. The third one used electronics and information technology to automate production. And we pray that the fourth one will accelerate the degree of automation and be creative about it. That's AI. Still, the question remains, as African right now, is our current system preparing us enough for the AI revolution? I think the answer is no at the moment. Or are we going to remain just end use of AI technology? I think it's mostly going to happen if we don't do something about it. Because we shouldn't ask if AI can apply it to our fields. We better ask how AI apply it to our field. I hope by now you have an answer to the question of, should we join the AI revolution? Thank you.
Thank you, Rockefeller. Very nice presentation, right on time. So there are two questions. So the first one is from I will look, I think Marcel. So Marcel Ambo is asking if you could provide materials or resources that can help increase his knowledge of machine learning and data science. That's the first question. And the second, answer it, and then I will tell you the second question. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, there are currently lots of materials available out there, but where one can actually learn more about it. I actually advise him to rather reach out to me, and through my email, I will discuss with him about that. But definitely there are lots of platforms like Coursera, like Udacity, like Google Machine Learning Crash Course, where one can start learning the basis or the building blocks of data science or AI, for instance, and later on specialize in one field. But to be honest, I would also love to see contextual curated learning program designed for Africans, for instance, because people like us, for instance, we learn AI through data sets that come from the US, from the UK, from Germany. I don't have anything against those countries, but I think it would be more contextual to see some AI design program that teach Africans with Africans data. Not to sound too Pan-Africanist, huh? That's just my point of view. But at the moment, the material available are basically on the different sites that I mentioned, and we could definitely link up for me, and I will share with you more about that. Here is my email address.